The brass bell at the grinder is designed to break you. It reflects the sun like a judging eye, waiting for you to ring it and quit. But for Casey Rhodes, the bell wasn't the enemy. The enemy was the door in front of her, the simulation rounds bruising her ribs, and the crushing realization that being the first female candidate wasn't enough if she was dead. The heat on San Clemente Island was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket of humid air that pressed against the lungs and made the simple act of breathing feel like labor. But the heat wasn't what was making Casey Rhodes's hands tremble inside her tactile gloves. It was the silence. Casey stood stacked up outside the heavy steel door of the kill house, a labyrinthine structure of plywood and tires designed to simulate the close-quarters chaos of urban warfare. Behind her stood 3 other candidates, men who had become her brothers, her shadows, and occasionally her critics. They were breathing in rhythm, a cadence of controlled adrenaline. Casey tried to match them, but her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Breach her up," whispered Petty Officer Griggs, the point man. Casey stepped forward. She was the breacher today. It was her job to blow the door, toss the flashbang, and clear the fatal funnel, the doorway where most operators died. She had done this 100 times in drills. She knew the explosive calculations. She knew the geometry of the room entry. But for the last week, she had failed every single live simulation run. She checked the charge on the doorframe. Strip charge set. Detonator wired. "Ready!" she hissed into her comms. "Execute," came the voice of Instructor Vance through her earpiece. Vance was a legend in the teams, a man with a scar running through his left eyebrow and a reputation for failing candidates who showed even a microsecond of hesitation. He hated that Casey was here. He hadn't said it explicitly, but he didn't have to. The way he looked at her, like she was a cracked tile in a perfect mosaic, said enough. Casey squeezed the detonator. Boom! The explosion rocked her teeth. The door swung inward on its hinges, smoke billowing out. This was it. The critical second. Casey reached for the flashbang on her vest, pulled the pin, and tossed it. She waited for the bang. 1 second, 2 seconds. Nothing. A dud. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. The standard operating procedure was to announce the failure and transition to a secondary breach or entry. But Casey froze. Her mind locked on the unexploded ordnance sitting in the room. In that split second of hesitation, a figure appeared in the smoke of the doorway. A cardboard target on a track, moving at human speed. The target fired. 3 distinct thwacks hit Casey in the chest plate. Simulation rounds. If this were real life, her lungs would be perforated. Her heart stopped. "Man down!" Griggs screamed, pushing past her limp body to engage the threat. The exercise dissolved into chaos. The team tried to recover, but the flow was broken. Within 30 seconds, the entire squad was dead. "Index! Index! Index!" Instructor Vance's voice boomed over the loudspeakers, cutting through the ringing in Casey's ears. The lights in the kill house snapped on, washing out the tactical gloom with harsh fluorescent glare. Casey ripped off her helmet, gasping for air. The simulation rounds had left welts, but the shame hurt worse. Vance walked down the catwalk above them, looking down like a vengeful god. He didn't yell. That was the worst part. Vance only yelled when he thought you could do better. When he thought you were hopeless, he went quiet. He climbed down the ladder and walked straight up to Casey. He stood 6 inches taller than her, blocking out the light. "Rhodes," Vance said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "That is the 5th breach you've botched in 3 days. You froze on a dud flashbang. In the teams, a dud means you improvise. You do not stop. You stopped." "Instructor, Don't!" Vance cut her off. You're thinking. That's your problem. You're calculating the physics of the grenade instead of flowing with the combat. You are the smartest candidate in this class. Your navigation scores are perfect. Your PT scores are in the top 10%. But in here, he gestured to the plywood walls, in here you are a liability, and a liability gets people killed. He leaned in close, the smell of stale coffee and Copenhagen tobacco on his breath. The review board meets tomorrow morning, Rhodes. I'm recommending a drop. Pack your gear. Casey felt the blood drain from her face. This was it. 2 years of preparation. The hell of Bud S, the freezing surf torture, the logs, the boats, all of it, ending because she couldn't clear a room without overthinking it. Instructor, give me one more run, she pleaded, her voice cracking slightly. Vance shook his head. There are no one more runs in the Hindu Kush, Rhodes. You're done. He walked away, leaving her standing in the fatal funnel, the smell of burnt explosive powder stinging her nose. Her team, Griggs, Miller, and Kowalski, wouldn't look her in the eye. They started packing up their gear, the silence between them heavy and awkward. They liked her. They respected her grit. But they knew Vance was right. In a firefight, hesitation was death. Casey walked out of the kill house and into the blinding California sun. She walked past the obstacle course, the O course, where she had broken the female record just last week. It didn't matter now. She went to the locker room, a separate, smaller annex converted for her use. She sat on the wooden bench, her hands shaking. She pulled her Sig Sauer P226 out of her holster and began to disassemble it for cleaning. It was a ritual. The metal felt cold and grounding. She looked at her reflection in the small steel mirror on the locker door. She didn't see a warrior. She saw a fraud, a girl who was good at taking tests but bad at war. She remembered her father's voice. Some people are hammers, Casey. Some people are nails. You're smart enough to be the architect. So why are you trying to be the hammer? Maybe he was right. Maybe she belonged in intelligence, behind a desk at Langley or the Pentagon, analyzing satellite feeds. Maybe the trident, the gold insignia of the SEALs, was just a dream she had chased to prove him wrong. She was scrubbing the carbon off the slide of her pistol when the door opened. She expected Vance, coming to collect her badge. It wasn't Vance. The man standing in the doorway was older, perhaps in his late 40s, wearing a standard woodland camo uniform with no insignia on the collar, just the trident pinned to his chest. His hair was silver, cropped close, and his face was a map of deep lines, etched by wind, sun, and impossible decisions. It was Commander Sterling. Casey scrambled to her feet, snapping to attention. "Commander!" Sterling was a myth in the naval special warfare community. He had operated in Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq, and places the government wouldn't admit existed. He was the kind of officer who didn't sit behind a desk. He famously refused promotions that would take him out of the field. "At ease, Rhodes," Sterling said. His voice was gravel, low and resonant. He stepped into the small room, looking around at the Spartan conditions. "Vance tells me you're washing out." "Yes, sir," Casey said, staring at the wall. "Recommendation for drop due to performance in CQC." "I saw the tapes," Sterling said. He leaned against a locker, crossing his arms. "You're fast. Your aim is true. But the moment the variable changes, a dud grenade, a jammed weapon, a hostage moving unpredictably, you freeze." "Why?" Casey swallowed hard. "I want to make the right decision, sir. I don't want to make a mistake." "So you calculate," Sterling said. "You analyze the probabilities." "Yes, sir. Precision is key." Sterling laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was dry, like boots crunching on dry leaves. Precision is for target shooting, Rhodes. Combat is chaos. You are trying to impose order on chaos, and because you can't, you freeze. He walked over to her, picking up the disassembled pieces of her Sig Sauer. He put the weapon back together in under 5 seconds, his movements a blur of muscle memory. He slammed the magazine home and handed it back to her. "Do you know why I'm here?" he asked. "No, sir. I'm looking for a specific operator for a task force. I've been watching your class. I wanted you, Rhodes. You have the mind for the complex operations we run. But Vance is right. You think too much." Casey felt a tear threaten to spill, but she held it back. "I'm trying, sir. I'm trying to be perfect." "That's your problem," Sterling said. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. He looked her dead in the eyes, his gaze intense enough to burn. "You are treating this like a test you can ace. You think if you check every box, you win. But the enemy doesn't have a checklist." He placed a hand on her shoulder. It was heavy. "I'm going to override Vance, one time. You have the final training evolution tonight. Operation Nightfall. It's a full mission profile. If you fail, you're gone. If you pass, you're mine." Casey nodded, hope warring with terror. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. I'll focus. I'll be sharper." "No," Sterling said sharply. "You're not listening." He leaned in, his face inches from hers. The air in the room seemed to vanish. "Rhodes, you are failing because you are holding on to Casey Rhodes. You are holding on to the girl who wants to be a hero, the girl who wants to make her father proud, the girl who is afraid of dying." He paused, letting the silence stretch. Then he spoke the 3 words that would change everything. "Kill the recruit." Casey blinked. "Sir." "Kill the recruit," Sterling repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The recruit is scared. The recruit wants to pass a test. The recruit worries about what Vance thinks. You need to kill her. Bury her here in this locker room. The only thing that walks out that door is the weapon. The weapon doesn't care if it lives or dies. The weapon simply functions. Stop being a person, Rhodes. Be the consequence." He stepped back, the intensity fading into a blank, unreadable mask. "Tonight at 0200, San Clemente. Kill the recruit, Rhodes, or don't bother showing up." He turned and left. Casey stood alone in the silence. Kill the recruit. She looked in the mirror again. She saw the fear in her eyes. That was the recruit. That was the girl who needed validation. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them, the expression on her face had changed. The fear wasn't gone, but it was locked away behind a wall of cold resolve. She finished cleaning her gun. The transport chopper, an MH-60 Black Hawk, banked hard over the Pacific, the spray from the Whitecaps visible even in the dark through the open doors. The wind whipped through the cabin, freezing the sweat on Casey's neck. She sat opposite Griggs and Kowalski. They were checking their gear, their faces painted in green and black camo cream. They looked nervous. The word had come down. This wasn't a standard training run. The instructors, usually present as safety officers, were pulling back. This was a blind evolution. No scripts, no safety timeouts unless there was a real medical emergency. The pilot's voice crackled in her headset. 2 minutes to LZ. We're dropping you in the surf. Swim to the beach. Target compound is 3 clicks north. Hostage rescue. High-value target is being held by a reinforced cell of OP4. OP4, opposing force. Usually, these were other instructors wearing different uniforms. They fired sim rounds, but they were trained to hurt you. "Hook up!" the crew chief yelled. Casey stood up. She felt the familiar flutter in her stomach, the voice of the recruit asking, What if the waves are too high? What if I drown? Kill the recruit, she thought. The weapon doesn't drown. The weapon functions. She hooked her fast rope onto the bar, but the chief waved it off. No ropes! Helocast! The bird hovered 10 feet above the black, churning water. Go, go, go! Casey jumped. The water hit her like a sledgehammer. It was freezing, the kind of cold that seized your muscles instantly. She surfaced, sputtering, and immediately checked her rifle, a customized HK-460 with a suppressor. She was buoyant thanks to her gear, but the waves were rough. She found her team in the darkness. They kicked toward the shore, the phosphorescence of the ocean glowing around them. They hit the beach, crawling through the wet sand, shivering uncontrollably. But Casey didn't feel the cold. She forced her mind to shut down the sensory input that didn't matter. Cold is irrelevant. Shivering affects aim. Tighten core. Status, Griggs whispered. Weapon green. Optics green, Casey said. Her voice sounded different to her own ears. Flat. Dead. They moved inland, into the scrub brush of the island. The target compound was an old naval observation post, a concrete bunker complex surrounded by rusted chain link. They approached the perimeter. Kowalski cut the fence. They moved in silence, using hand signals. Casey was on point. She moved with a fluidity she hadn't possessed the day before. She wasn't thinking about her foot placement. She was simply moving where the shadows were deepest. They reached the main structure. It was dark. No movement. Too quiet, Miller whispered. Suddenly, a floodlight snapped on, blinding them. Rat-tat-tat-tat! Machine gun fire erupted from a bunker to their right. It was blank fire, but the concussive force was real. Contact right! Suppress! Griggs yelled. The team scattered. Casey dove behind a concrete barrier. She brought her rifle up, scanning for the muzzle flash. She saw it. She fired 2 rounds, simunitions, hitting the gunner's position. The gun went silent. Move up! They breached the main door. This was it. The fatal funnel. Casey didn't hesitate. She didn't check with Griggs. She saw the door, she kicked it, and she flowed into the room. Left. Clear. Right. Contact. A figure in padded armor raised a weapon. Casey put 2 rounds in his chest before he could pull the trigger. Room clear, she shouted. They moved deeper into the complex. The hallways were narrow, filled with smoke and strobing lights designed to disorient them. The sound of screaming, recorded audio of torture victims, blared over speakers at ear-splitting volume. It was psychological warfare. The recruit would have flinched. The recruit would have thought about the horror. Casey just checked her corners. They reached the final door. The intelligence briefing said the HVT was in the basement. Griggs went to set the charge. I'm out of strip charges, he cursed. I lost the pack in the surf. Miller checked his gear. I'm out, too. They looked at Casey. She had 1 charge left. But as she reached for it, she saw a wire running from the door handle to a propane tank strapped to the wall. A booby trap. If she blew the door, the propane would ignite. It would kill the hostage and the team. It's rigged, Casey said. We can't breach. We have to, Griggs argued. Time is ticking. No. Casey looked at the wall next to the door. It was drywall over studs, not concrete like the exterior. We go through the wall. That's not in the playbook, Miller said. Burn the playbook, Casey snapped. She raised her heavy boot and smashed it into the drywall. It crumbled. She smashed it again, creating a hole. She reached in, grabbed the stud, and ripped the sheetrock away. Flashbang! She yelled. She tossed a banger through the hole she'd made. Bang! She dove through the wall, debris tearing at her uniform. Inside, 3 OP-4 shooters were waiting at the door, aiming at the fatal funnel she had avoided. They were stunned by the wall entry. Casey dropped 2 of them before they could turn. Griggs and Miller poured in behind her, taking out the third. The room was secure. In the center, a man sat hooded and tied to a chair. Casey holstered her rifle and pulled her knife to cut the bonds. She ripped the hood off the hostage. She froze. It wasn't a dummy. It wasn't an instructor. It was Commander Sterling. He wasn't wearing protective gear. He was wearing his dress uniform, now covered in drywall dust. He looked up at her, his face impassive. "Target secure," Casey said, her voice shaking slightly as the adrenaline dump hit her. Sterling stood up, rubbing his wrists. He looked at the hole in the wall. He looked at the dead OP-4 shooters who were shaking their heads in disbelief. "You didn't use the door," Sterling said. "The door was death, sir," Casey replied. "You destroyed government property," he pointed out, gesturing to the wall. "I neutralized the threat and secured the package, sir." Sterling looked at her. For the first time, a small, genuine smile touched his lips. "Who are you?" he asked. Casey straightened up. She was covered in mud, her face bleeding from a scratch, her eyes wild but focused. "Petty Officer Rhodes, sir." "Wrong," Sterling said softly. He walked past her, toward the exit. "The recruit is dead. Welcome to the teams, operator." The celebration was short-lived. While the rest of the class was heading to the bars in San Diego to celebrate passing SQT, Casey was summoned to a briefing room in a restricted hangars at North Island. She walked in to find Commander Sterling and Instructor Vance standing over a digital map table. Vance looked at her, and for the first time, there was no disdain in his eyes, just a cold, professional assessment. He nodded once. That was all the apology she would get, and all she needed. "Rhodes," Sterling said, skipping pleasantries. "I told you I was looking for a specific asset. That wasn't a metaphor." He tapped the table. A map of a port city in Yemen zoomed into view. "We have a situation. A CIA asset has been burned. She is currently hiding in a safe house in Aden. The city is overrun by insurgents. We can't send a full platoon. It would trigger a war. We need a ghost team. 2 operators. Low profile. Get in. Stabilize the asset. Get out." Casey looked at the map. "Why me, sir?" "Because the asset is a woman," Vance interjected. "And in that part of the world, a woman in a burqa is invisible. A man is a target. You can move where we can't." "You passed the test, Rhodes," Sterling said. "But the wall breach told me what I really needed to know. You stopped asking for permission to survive." "When do we leave?" Casey asked. "Wheels up in 1 hour," Sterling said. "I'm leading the element. You're my second." Casey felt the weight of it. This wasn't training. This was the real deal. No safety officers, no restart button. "One question, sir," Casey asked. "Shoot." "Is the recruit really dead?" Sterling looked at her, his eyes hard as flint. "We'll find out when the first bullet flies, won't we?" Aden smelled of spices, sewage, and diesel. The heat rising off the pavement was visible, shimmering in waves that distorted the chaotic marketplace. Casey moved through the crowd, a phantom draped in a black abaya, her face hidden behind a niqab. To the insurgents patrolling the streets, she was just another local woman. But underneath the loose fabric, her hand hovered over the grip of a compact MP7 submachine gun. "Target building is the blue structure, 50 meters, 9 o'clock. Commander Sterling's voice crackled in her hidden earpiece. He was perched on a rooftop 3 blocks away, providing overwatch. "I have 3 heat signatures in the lobby. Asset is upstairs. You're clear to proceed." Casey slipped into the narrow alleyway beside the safe house. Her heart hammered against her ribs, the natural biological response to danger. The old Casey, the recruit who overthought every variable, would have paused to calculate the odds. Kill the recruit, she told herself. Be the weapon. She picked the lock on the rear door in seconds. Inside, the air was stale. She moved with a silence that felt unnatural, her boots rolling heel to toe to dampen any sound. As she reached the landing, a guard emerged from a bedroom, weapon slung over his shoulder. He opened his mouth to shout. Casey didn't freeze. She stepped into his personal space, driving her knife into his collarbone while clamping a hand over his mouth. He slumped to the floor, silent. It was brutal, efficient, and necessary. She found the room. Tap, tap, tap. The door opened to reveal a terrified woman with dark hair. "We're leaving," Casey whispered, handing her a spare abaya. Suddenly, the world exploded. An RPG slammed into the front of the building, shaking the foundation. "Ambush!" Sterling shouted over the comms. "They made me. I'm taking fire. I'm pinned. Get her to the marina, Rhodes. You are on your own." Gunfire erupted from the stairwell below. They were coming up. "Stay behind me," Casey ordered the asset. "Hold my belt. Don't let go." She burst into the hallway. 2 insurgents with AK-47s were sprinting up the stairs. This was the fatal funnel, the scenario she had failed in training. But there was no instructor here to fail her, only death. Casey raised her weapon. Double tap, double tap. Both targets dropped before they could pull their triggers. They sprinted out into the alley, debris raining down around them. "East exit," Casey yelled, dragging the asset toward the marina. They rounded the corner and skidded to a halt. A Toyota Technical with a DSHK heavy machine gun mounted on the bed was blocking the street, its barrel traversing towards them. "I'm cut off," Casey yelled into her mic. She checked her gear. No grenades, no support. The recruit would have panicked. The weapon simply improvised. She looked up. A high-tension power line ran directly over the truck, suspended by ceramic insulators. "Cover your eyes!" Casey screamed. She raised her pistol, aiming not at the gunman, but at the pole. She fired 3 rounds. The ceramic shattered. The live wire snapped, whipping down like a fiery lash. It struck the metal truck with a deafening crack. A massive arc of blue electricity exploded. The gunner convulsed and collapsed. The driver bailed out, screaming as the tires melted into the asphalt. "Move!" They sprinted past the sparking wreckage, the smell of ozone choking the air. They reached the marina just as a Zodiac boat roared to the dock. Casey shoved the asset on board and dove in after her. As the boat tore away from the shore, Casey slumped against the rubber gunnel. Commander Sterling was there, reloading a magazine. He looked at the burning city, then at Casey. He saw the stillness in her eyes. The panic was gone. "Asset secure," Casey said, her voice steady. Sterling nodded, a rare look of respect on his face. "Good work, operator." Casey looked back at the smoke rising over Aden. She had left the recruit back there in the dust. The only thing coming home was the warrior. Casey Rhodes proved that the battlefield isn't just about physical strength. It's about the mental switch between hesitation and action. Sometimes the person holding you back is yourself. If this story of grit and transformation inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful military dramas. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their toughest battle is in their own mind. Stay safe, stay strong,